Support for the Scouted Football podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped is trusted by over 2 million men worldwide. Join the movement for all your below-the-waist grooming needs. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. Hello, welcome back to another episode from the Scouted Football podcast. I am Joe Donoghue, and today we've got one of your favourites. It's a scouting session with the one and only Lee Scott. First things first though, before we get into where we'll be scouting players from this week, there are some congratulations in order. For those of you who don't know, Lee has been working as head of data analysis at Velez CF in Spain, remotely working for him, unfortunately. But the team have just secured promotion to Segunda División B, so well done to all involved there. Today, though, the Scouted pod is not centred in Spain or similar sunny climes. We're in Scandinavia for something of a Scandi pod. And for those who aren't familiar, Scandinavia covers Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark and Iceland in Europe. And I think myself and Lee have a nice spread of players to discuss from across those countries. It's an area of the world which is quite intriguing from a scouting perspective. For a number of reasons, namely because in a climate where outdoor pitches at grassroots level are often inaccessible for many months of the year, these countries continually produce players at the top level across the European stage. And to emphasise that, this summer Finland will be competing at the European Championships for the first time. Norway and Denmark have some of the most exciting crops of young talent across Europe, and the Swedish top flight, the Allsvenskan, has a real breadth of exciting under-the-radar names. Without further ado, though, Lee, welcome back to the pod. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm good, Joe. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. Looking forward to getting into some more abstract leagues. I think that perhaps there's quite a lot of interest in, but there hasn't really been. There isn't a huge following of it in the UK, I'd say.
No, there's definitely not. I think that you touched upon it there, that there's so much breadth of talent around the Scandinavian leagues that it tends to be one of my favourite areas to look at when I'm doing any type of scouting. I try to keep abreast of all the interesting names that come up, but it can be a little bit tricky because, as you just said, some of the pitches are inaccessible during the winter months. So in Sweden and Norway, they run a different schedule to the rest of, if you like, main section of Europe. The Swedish Allsvenskan has only just got underway a couple of weeks ago, and we're still waiting for the start of the top flight in Norway. It was delayed by, I think, a month. So it'll get going soon, but I think that adds to it a little bit for me, because it gives you the opportunity when you get to the point where the rest of Europe is kind of winding down its domestic season, that there's a whole other part of Europe that you can jump right into and enjoy football the whole year round.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did do a similar pod a short while back, didn't we? Where we looked at players in Denmark, as well as Belgium and Holland. Yep. And for that reason, I've only gone with the one Denmark-based player this time around in my 3 picks. But I seem to recall us discussing Mohamed Darami and Kamal Sulaiman, who play for FC Copenhagen and FC Noduland, respectively. Lee, I'm sure you'll have kept an eye on their progress in recent months, because especially Sulaiman has been one of the most exciting players in Denmark and in Scandinavia over the past few months. But have they lived up to expectations for you this season, or what's been your assessment?
I think Sulaiman certainly has. I think we also talked about Diomade on that podcast, Mohamed Diomade, who is also at Noduland, the Ivory Coast midfielder, come winger, come fullback, come plays whatever he wants, really. I think that Noduland and Sulaiman and Diomade have done really well. I think Darami has been good in patches, good in flashes. I've seen him on video. I've watched his full game a couple of times, and he's still giving you that little bit where he drifts in and out of the game a little bit and doesn't always really grab your attention and dominate on the ball the way that he should do. But again, he's so young. I still think that will definitely be something that comes out in his game. But I think that you've actually picked a player at Noduland who has appeared, who's even younger than Diomade and Sulaiman, and that's just testament to how focused Noduland are on the development of youth players.
Yeah, and I suppose that's probably a good place to start then, really, isn't it? The first player on our list is the youngest, and that's Andreas Schelderup at FC Noduland, who is a 16-year-old attacking midfielder slash forward, playing regularly for Noduland in Denmark's top flight on a regular basis. He was quite remarkably a free transfer from Bodo Glimt last summer in Norway, who absolutely romped to the Norwegian title in 2020. And ever since he arrived in Denmark, he absolutely blew away the competition in Denmark's under-19 league. I think he scored 8 goals in 11 games, a handful of assists here and there as well. And since then, it became quite apparent that despite his age, he was able to come into this Nordsjælland team and really impact the first team. And I think the fact that it is Nordsjælland where he's come into is probably one of the most important things, because at other clubs, 16-year-olds, they wouldn't get a look in, regardless of how well they're doing sort of at an under-19 competition. But with Nordsjælland, the average age of the squad is very, very young. I think, you're looking at, multiple teenagers in the starting 11. The oldest players in the squad, sort of, you're pushing sort of 23, 24. So it is a very young team. So it wouldn't be very difficult for him to come in and mix it with players of a similar age. So I think that's been quite beneficial. But yeah, he's played, I think, 12 times for the first team, starting 4 of the last 5 in the Super League's championship round, which is when the league splits and all the best teams play each other to see who will lift the title. But he scored versus Lyngby and Sunderjyske before the league split, and since then has picked up 3 assists in those last 4 starts. At 16 years old, playing in a top flight division, this is some special stuff. It's very very exciting. I think that this appears to be the next big Scandinavian talent without sort of imposing too much of an expectation on him. He holds on to it well, and I think that's one of the things I really like about young players playing well above their age, is that I think everybody's noticed how little time you have on the ball when you go up a level. Even yourself, Lee. When you're playing, against better players, it's constantly getting nicked off your toe. You have to be sharper with your decisions, your awareness, everything about it, and you have to be more physical as well, holding off challenges. I think he's alert without being erratic, which for 16's very impressive. And you can't really argue with the numbers that he's posting already. Lee, I know that he's a player that you've seen a little bit of, mainly because he's only played a little bit. But how would you describe him as a player?
I think the first thing to say, just to touch on it quickly, is you spoke about it just in that little segment, that the thing that young players always talk about when they move up to the first team environment is the speed. It's the speed of thought, the speed of pass, the speed of action, if you like, that's so difficult for them to acclimatise to at first. That's why many teams, before a player gets exposed to first team football, will come up a few times a couple of months before and train with the first team just to get an idea of the tempo. And Schelderup's come right in and he just looks at home. He's got that capacity to play in tight spaces that you like from an attacking player. He doesn't mind receiving the ball with pressure behind him, even with more physical players. He's quite combative for a 16-year-old. He's not somebody he's not frightened to use his elbows and to push himself back on the defender and hold them off in that way. But what really struck me, I mean, I saw him coming at the first team, and I didn't look at first. I knew he was a young player, but in Nordsjælland, you expect young players to come in. It wasn't until the Lyngby match that he really, really stood out for me, because you have a teenager coming into the first team squad, and you touched upon yourself that he scored in this match. His goal was from a direct free kick about 20 yards out of goal, right in the centre. How many 16-year-olds would be able to demand to be the one to take that free kick and to have their teammates allow them to take that free kick? And again, what I really liked is that he took the free kick and he puts it to the goalkeeper's left. He completely wrong-footed the goalkeeper. The goalkeeper didn't even move, and that's a mark of the quality. And then you have him in the next match, he comes in and scores 2 goals, and those 2 goals are so different. The first one, he gets the ball wide and he drifts right across the face to the penalty area. he drifts past, I think, about 3 or 4 challenges with defenders being put on their backsides because he's fake shooting and he's putting them down, and he's just got that composure and that almost impudence to keep moving with the ball and not rush his shot. He just waits and pauses and then releases the shot at the right time. And I think that confidence is something that really, really stands out in him. He just looks like he is incredibly comfortable at the first team level already. And again, that's something at Noduland, which is easier because the coaching staff like young players. The teammates around him are young as well, so there's an affinity there, if you like, between them all. But he still has that swagger, if you like, and some people don't like it in young players when they can look a little bit arrogant, a little bit overconfident. But I think that that's a mark of a young player who has the capacity to really develop and do well, because you've got to have belief in yourself as a professional footballer. There's absolutely no two ways about it. You've got to have that confidence and that swagger to be able to receive the ball and know that you have the ability to take players on. And his technique, his strength, his dribbling, his vision, all of it so well, all of it so far is looking really, really good. It's just going to be a case of seeing exactly what happens, I think, next season when he has a full season with the first team, and then we'll really see what we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of looking at the timing of those goals that you mentioned there against Lyngby and Sunderjysk, they came right before the league splits, and then you kind of give the manager a decision to make. And I suppose with it being Nordsjælland, it's probably not a difficult decision. But from that point, he was, I think it was 3 or 4 starts before that. And since then, he started 4 of the next 5. So clearly there's an indication that he can be trusted, and I think that self-belief definitely comes into it. And the thing as well is that when you're watching Schelderup, it's that you'll start the game and you'll think, okay, well, I'm looking in certain areas of the pitch to see where he is, but then he's not there because I think he's played in about 4 or 5 different positions already,
Yep.
which I'd say is probably not abnormal for a 16-year-old while, his first real taste of senior football, because you're trying to feel out where he's suited best, where his skill set is maximized, and the rougher points of his game aren't exploited. But to have played sort of on the left wing, on the right wing, as more of a, I mean, he's listed as a centre forward in some of these games, but I'd say that he's more of a withdrawn forward
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
in terms of the balls that he's coming deep to get and allowing those wide forwards to push on. Is there something about him playing multiple positions which is, I don't know, potentially exciting for you?
I think that we're still to see exactly where he's going to settle, and I think we've touched upon this in podcasts that we've recorded before, that versatility is great. Versatility is something that coaches look for because it gives them flexibility within their squads. If a player is versatile and can play 2 or 3 different positions, but sometimes in a young player, you've got to be careful with versatility because it can harm development. If you have a young player who you're giving a lot of exposure to at first team football, but you're playing him on the right of midfield and centre midfield as a striker, he's not getting the opportunity to build up those pictures at the first team level that players need to have. They need to understand what the game looks like with a little bit more game time to understand exactly the positions, the spaces, the flow of the game from those different positions. I think that Schelderup at the moment, I mean, he's a player who likes to, wherever you play him, whether you play him in attack, in midfield, in the wing, he has a tendency to drift into that left-sided space or the half space on that side of the field. I think that's eventually where we're going to see him. I think that he is somebody who can play in the wing, maybe doesn't display top level speed yet. I would think that if it was me and I was going to place a bet on it, I think he'll develop into a really good left sided attacking number 8 or number 10. With the ability to get forward and really affect the game from those positions. Similar in, if you're going to make a comparison to a good first team player at the moment, similar kind of movement profile in that position, I think, to that we see Kevin De Bruyne have at Manchester City, where he can pick the ball up deep, but then he drives forward into more advanced positions, and he's kind of the creative player who unlocks defences from that area.
I see. Okay, then. It's probably best if we move on to the next player on our respective lists. And Lee, who is first on your list?
I'm going to go for the one. Apparently, I'm getting quite obvious with my picks. I think you said that Scouted Lou guessed that I was going to go for this player, and it's Akinkunmi Amu. the 18-year-old Nigerian wide player who currently plays in Sweden for Hammarby. Um, some of you who are listening to this will have already seen the clips that are starting to emerge on social media of Amu, and I think it's safe to say that you're going to see a lot more clips emerging of him in play. There was one in particular, I forget who posted it, but it was from a match this season, and you could hear the commentators in the background as Amu picks up the ball for Hammarby, and all you can hear is the colour commentator, the second commentator. His mic is still open, and he's just giggling as Amu gets the ball because of the things that he's doing in possession. There's little tricks and flicks to get the ball away from defenders. He's feinting on one side, putting the ball on the other side of defenders, and then I think in that sequence he eventually tries a shot at goal that curls towards the far post and just misses. I think that kind of encapsulates, if you're going to take one clip of a player and encapsulate what you get from that player, I think that is Amu in a nutshell. He is a creative force. He's not somebody who does the conventional thing. I don't think he's quite diminutive, quite small. I think he comes in, he's listed on transfer market, I think about 163 centimetres, which I think is about 5'3", if I remember correctly. I'm never great with the conversion of heights from centimetres to feet. But he's somebody who, when he picks the ball up, he's very slight, and you look at him and think he's just going to get knocked off the ball. But his body control and his body orientation is so good that defenders don't even make contact when they're trying to. So often he does that little feint, the fake move to go one way before just gliding the other way. But he does it so smoothly that the defenders are left completely unbalanced. I think that there was some talk last season. He only moved to Hammarby in June last year, in 2020. And there was a lot of talk that we would see a lot of him last season for Hammarby, and it never really materialised. I don't know how much of that was him trying to acclimatise to football and life in Sweden. I mean, you don't get much different climate-wise from moving from Nigeria to Sweden, so there will be a little bit of a period where he has to get used to life before he can get used to football. But certainly this season for Hammarby, I think we're going to see a lot more of it. So far in the Allsvenskan, they've played 3 games. They haven't started well. They've already lost to Malmo and ALK, and they have managed to beat Mjällby. But Amu has been one of the key players. He's played, I think, the vast majority of minutes so far. And already we're seeing his style of play come out. We're seeing the dribble volume. We're seeing the attacking threat and the intricate link-up play that he's capable of when the ball moves into that area. I think that there are still areas of his game where he's going to have to develop. If we talk about, I mean, it's still early, but if we talk about next steps away from Swedish football, then you're kind of looking at the next step up in terms of competition in a league. So, what Holland, Belgium, lower tier, Liga, Bundesliga, the lower sides of those leagues, and you're looking at a player who really has to develop the defensive side of his game. I mean, yes, he's creative, yes, he's great in possession, but sometimes out of possession, he can be played around a little bit too easily, and he does have the athletic ability to press really well, but he still doesn't always take the correct line of approach when he's pressing. But all of these things, all of these apparent negatives are so difficult to place because he is just an 18-year-old. He's an 18-year-old who's only been in European football since June last year, so you don't know how much tactical and technical training he's had at this point and how much of it has just been natural talent. So I think that we'll see those things develop at Hammarby. They're a club who you would expect to be kind of mid-table, upper mid-table in Allsvenskan this season, I think. And I think that Amu will get a lot of playing time and a lot of time to develop there.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of interest. And I'm not talking from clubs necessarily, but a lot of interest in just from people watching the Allsvenskan, in Amu this season, because it is purely about that dribble volume. As you say, he's just such an exciting player, and as you said, he's around 5'3", 5'4", so not your average height for a professional footballer, but he still manages to mix it. And I think the fact that he signed from, I think it was Sido's FC, it's listed on Transfermarkt in Nigeria, in June 2020. The fact that he's been in European football for all of 9 months, and the fact that he is potentially going to be one of the more exciting players in the Allsvenskan this season, it always gets me that I think we perhaps neglect the individual quality that is often in African football, that they can come in the Allsvenskan is a prestigious league. Let's not forget, and they can really, really have an impact on games already. And we've seen how much of an impact he's already had. This is why that squads at Youth International World Cup tournaments and sort of under 17, under 20 World Cups from Africa, sort of like Nigeria's in 2019 at the under 17 World Cup, which Amu was a part of. This is why those squads are so highly rated going into the tournaments, because there are so many sort of untapped. There's so much untapped potential in there, because I think we've discussed this. I've discussed this with others on this podcast, but there is so much potential in Africa which simply does not have a lens on it. And yeah, Amu is such an exciting player to watch, and the commentary that you mentioned, where the commentator just starts giggling, it is really funny, because you could imagine that no matter at what level or sort of the prestige of whatever TV channel the game is being broadcast on, you could imagine the commentator, whether it would be Martin Tyler or whoever's covering the Allsvenskan, they would just laugh, because it's one of those things where you think, this defender's got no chance. He's literally just moving through the gears, and just seems to be gliding through. And as you said, there are a few tweaks that perhaps need to be made to his game. But A, he's 18. B, they all sound very coachable as well.
Yeah.
Which is probably one of the more important things. That he's coming into Swedish football, and naturally he's going to be getting a good coaching education with Hammarby. So yeah, I think it's a reflection of the scouting team at Hammarby, that they've been able to identify a player who's probably going to go into the top 20-25% of players in that league. We've gone years without using the right tools for the job. We've all been there, some manscaping ruined by a shaving accident. That's why Manscaped has just released the new Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer, which features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce those needless grooming accidents. It's even waterproof, so you can use it with ease in the shower. Complete with a USB charging stand, 90 minutes runtime, as well as 20% discount and free delivery when you use the code SCOUTED20. What are you waiting for? Make your testes your besties. Moving on to the next player, though, and there are quite a few links here, because the player who's second in my list is Beni Adama Triore, who plays for BK Häcken, also in Sweden, and I think this is rather relevant given the previous discussion we had on Amu at Hammarby, because Beni Triore has come in from Côte d'Ivoire. He's coming from Isak Mimosas, who are probably one of the biggest clubs in West Africa. But Scandinavian clubs have always had strong links to African countries. We only need to look at sort of Right to Dream, how they own FC Noduland in Denmark. The likes of even John Obi Mikel playing at FK Lyn Oslo 15 years ago before moving to Man United and then Chelsea. But African immigration to Sweden has been something which really, really accelerated in the 70s, 80s, 90s, with civil wars breaking out in many former colonized African nations. And I was quite intrigued by this, because it's always seemed to be a good platform for players. Crepin Diatta went to Sarpsborg when he moved from Senegal, and there's been loads of other examples of African players going to Scandinavia as their first move into Europe. So I did a little bit of background, and it turns out that apparently in 1960 there were reportedly just 600 people born in Africa living in Sweden. But by 2000, that had moved up to 55,000. And then by 2009, that was 100,000. So, naturally, that's going to filter into the footballing pyramid. And one of those players who's made that move is another 18-year-old, is another winger, signed from Isak Mimosas in Côte d'Ivoire. And that is Beni Adama Traore. He joined even more recently in January 2021. And has played each game for Häcken this season, who finished third last year. So, it's not like he's coming into a team who are, bottom feeders, or who are struggling to battle against relegation to the Superettan, which is the second division. He's coming in and he's starting in a team who should be doing better than they currently are. They've had a bit of a slow start, but he scored 3 goals already, 2 in the cup and 1 in the league. And very similar to Amu, he's still quite small, but he's this ball of energy at the moment. Technically, you can see I watched about 3 or 4 of his games already. You can see that he is technically at a level which is probably higher than the average that you're getting in Sweden at the moment. Especially in those congested central areas. He operates mainly in that right-hand half space, and he just seems very much at home in a very foreign atmosphere. He similarly is a right-sided forward, likes to dribble, but quite intriguingly likes to play in field as opposed to carrying it out wide, like you might see with other right-footed right wingers. Um, I wouldn't go as far to say that it's odd, but it's something that I thought, well, it's quite not abnormal, but just it's something which you don't see all that often. I think that he's somebody who has very good potential just based on the 3 or 4 games that I've seen. And these are games in which Hocken have been a little bit unfortunate, but at the same time haven't really helped themselves. I think he has the potential to be a real asset to them this season, purely because his technical level is already there. He's already bang on, and he has been sort of one reading up on sort of on Beni Triore. He has been sort of one of the most sought after players at one of West Africa's biggest clubs. So it's no surprise that he's assimilated to the level quite well.
No, absolutely not. I think that he is a really, I mean, Hawk in general are really interested in terms of how they recruit. Really clever with the kind of players and markets that they access to get players in. They've obviously got a really good network across certain regions and areas of the world that they recruit from. I expect them to be up towards the top of the table. You said they were third last year. I expected at least the same this year. Interestingly, they've started really slowly, and they've actually lost all 3 games that they've played in Allsvenskan so far. But that does not detract from the performances of Traore. I think with a player like this, he's somebody who I noticed after the second game. I think the match where they lost against Malmo, I kind of watched some of that game back, and he was somebody immediately who stood out. But what I like to do when it's young attacking players that I might not have seen or might not have seen a lot of, one of the first things I try to do is figure out whether they're right footed or left footed, just because it gives you a little bit of context. As you said, if they're left footed and playing from the right, you'll expect them inside. If they're right footed and play from the right, you expect them to go outside a little bit more. The first thing that I noticed was that I really couldn't tell if Traore was right footed or left footed because he's got that balance. Not scared to receive the ball on his left foot, not scared to play the ball on his left foot. But when he carries the ball, he does prefer to do it on the right. But as you say, he's coming inside and he moves really smoothly and quickly through those congested spaces. So there's been a couple of points you see him pick up the ball and he plays a give and go with a teammate and he makes the incisive run, and it is so direct when he does it that if the teammate finds the right pass, he's through on goal. He's a player who, similar to Amu, he dribbles a lot, and you will see him carry the ball a lot at the opposition, but he does it really well. He's good at understanding how to keep the ball on the safe side, how to move the ball away from defenders, first touch into space to give himself a little bit of room before he explodes. All of these things you kind of look at and you start to build a picture of a player. And again, we talked about how Amu has came into Swedish football and had to acclimatise. You're absolutely right, Traore has had less time. He only arrived in January of this year and he's had to acclimatise to life in Sweden extremely quickly. But on the pitch, you can already see that his teammates trust him. And I think that's a huge plus for a young player. You can see his teammates are willing to give him the ball. I think that when I started to look at him a little bit more, I think that once you've done this for a little while, when you've looked at lots of players over the years, you kind of automatically start to draw a little bit of comparison between players when you're scouting them. And he reminds me a lot of the first time that I really saw Osman Bukhari play, the Ghanaian winger who moved to Genk last summer for $1 million from Slovenian football. He's somebody who I've wrote about for the Scout Handbook before. He's got a similar profile in terms of the positions that he takes up, his movements, his direct nature towards goal, and he likes to get a shot away or a final pass away. So I think there's a whole lot of promise from Traore at Hacken this year. If anyone gets a chance to catch any of their games or to find highlight packages, I really recommend having a look at him.
Yeah, just on the scouting element that obviously Hocken have done to bring in Beni Triore. They also signed a young left back at the same time, from ASIC Mimosas by the name of Yannick Adjumani, who hasn't played as much, but doesn't have a contract to the same length, which I think is quite important. They pretty much, I think they gave Triore a contract until 2024, which pretty much outlines how highly they rate him and how much they want to keep a hold of him. But it shows that they do have that scope of scouting in Africa. Moving on to the next player, the second player in your list, Lee. You've gone with a player from Vålerenga in Norway. So we're switching from the Allsvenskan to the Eliteserien in Norway. Who is it that you've gone with there?
Have you left it for me there, Joe, to pronounce his name? I know that you don't want to have a go
Yes,
at
I
that
have.
one. So it's obviously
Yes, I have.
Okay, we've gone for a 21-year-old right back currently playing for Vålerenga in the Eliteserien in Norway. His name is Christian Borchgrevnik. Quite a mouthful there. He's somebody who I really noticed last season. Obviously, we touched upon the fact that the Norwegian league season hasn't got underway yet. So I'm basing a lot of this on what I saw of him last term, what I've seen of him since, really, when I've kind of been keeping track of him. I think that he is a fullback. Vålerenga in the first instance, I mean, we could have chosen 3 or 4 players from Vålerenga alone to talk about on this podcast for young players with significant potential. There are fantastic attacking players there. They've got midfielders who are metronomes who can pass the ball. But I really like what Borchgrevnik brings to them from a profile point of view. And a lot of what we talk about when you're scouting players, when you're doing it as a consultancy or for a club, it's really important that you start to think about how different player profiles kind of build up to join together to make an overall squad, if you like. So you want to have as many complementary profiles in the squad as you can. So if you've got a winger on one side, for example, who likes to drift inside, as we've just talked about, Beni Triore, then you want to have a fullback on that side who can either make the run to provide the width or is a really good progressive passer who'll be able to find Traore as he moves into those areas. And that is something that Borchgrevik really, really has as a strength. He is a fantastic ball progressor from that position, as well as being capable defensively. He's not a fullback who you expect, and I would expect to see absolutely powering along the outside and going round the winger. He's not somebody who hits the byline very often. He does occasionally, situationally, but he is more comfortable in slightly more withdrawn positions. I think if I was going to draw a parallel, think about the kind of areas that Trent Alexander-Arnold likes to pick up the ball in terms of supporting and be able to give you that angled deep cross that he likes to play. Borchgrevnik likes to play in similar areas to that, so he likes to be the supporting player behind the ball who's always available to give an outlet. But last season, his metrics were extremely strong. He averaged 51.19 passes per 90, which is extremely high for a right back. Even for a team like Vålerenga, who you expect to be attacking a lot of the time, he was quite often the outlet in terms of progressing the ball out from the back. And since he's only 21 years old, you already start to see that that's a player who his teammates and his coaches trust to take the responsibility for that. So that passing volume is then combined with 6.59 passes to the final third per 90. So again, he's willing to play the line-breaking pass. He's willing to take responsibility to be the one who plays the ball into the final third and creates opportunities for his teammates to play from a more advanced platform. And finally, you have his progressive passes per 90, which is slightly different. Progressive passes just mean that from where he picks the ball up, he's playing a pass over a certain distance. It progresses the ball forward. So not necessarily in the final third, but still forward in dangerous areas. And he was averaging 10.1 progressive passes per 90 last year. So again, you start to, when you look at these metrics and you pull them together, and I'm reading these off of a profile that we use at Total Football Analysis when we write reports or we look at players. We pull everything together into one easy profile picture that shows you all the key metrics as well as positioning, and you really start to build a picture of what this player is as a right back. He's somebody who I don't expect to be in Norwegian football for much longer. I know there's already been interest from Germany and Italy in the player, and I would expect that to become more concrete. And I think when you think about this, we think about the fact he's likely to leave. He's likely to leave for me this coming summer transfer window. and that's when the different league seasons in Sweden and Norway, when they play from now through summer, that's when it becomes difficult, because players, similar to South American leagues, clubs can lose important players halfway through the season. That's something that I think that Vålerenga will have to be very, very aware of, because Borchgrevnik, I think, has the potential to play at a much higher level and to do so very, very well.
I can't claim that I've seen any of Borchgrevnik over the past few days since you gave me your list, Lee. But one thing that I can say is that sort of from his stats on Transfermarkt, he seems to be, absolutely first choice. He missed just the one game last season as Vålerenga finished third, and that was due to a yellow card suspension. He over the course of what was a very, very condensed Elite Serien season, which started in the mid-June and then ended in mid-December. He played every game. So, I mean, that's we always come back to the fact that the availability factor on this podcast, always being there, always being able to showcase yourself is very important, especially if you're playing in a league which isn't one of Europe's biggest, but at least gives you a good platform. And clearly he was playing in a very good team, playing with some very good teammates. Obviously, you discussed that we could have discussed 3 or 4 players in this Vålerenga side. Osam Sarawi is probably one that I think we both probably looked at it for this podcast and went, no, he's too big. He's too much of a name in Scandinavian football at the moment. But he would have been another great one to discuss, and another one who potentially would be leaving in the summer. And obviously that's a bargaining chip that Vålerenga will have for these types of players mid-season. Because you're taking a player away from a team in the midst of a likely a title run or a push for Europe, and it's one of those things where you'd be inclined to say, oh, well, you know what, we want X amount of money extra because we're going to have to try and find a replacement very quickly. But yeah, on Borchgrevnik, I can't say that I've seen any of him, but from your description of him, he definitely sounds like an interesting player.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting to note as well that he signed a contract extension last year in August, so his contract doesn't expire to 2023, and I think that in itself is quite often a sign for a young player when he signs a contract extension that's multi-year in that way. It's a sign that the club are trying to protect his value a little bit. So when, I don't doubt that he's going to leave Vålerenga. There's no way that he will stay at Vålerenga. He's yet to make his national team debut for Norway, but I don't think it can be far away. I confess I haven't actually asked the oracle of Norwegian football, Ben Wells, who is somebody who I would kind of bow down to in terms of his knowledge compared to mine of Norwegian football. But I would think that players in front of him, there can't be many more of that quality. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it will become a hard thing for Vålerenga to then be able to replace Borchgrevnik if he does leave. But that's something that they do. They're a selling and development club, so they will have options and profiles in their youth teams that they will look to bring through. And that's part of the great thing of Scandinavian football, that yes, you get players. We've already talked about the clubs that are recruiting very interesting players, and like Sulaiman and Triore, and then you have the talent developers like Noduland and like Vålerenga, clubs who develop their own players, and they get a chance at first team level, and that's something that's really important for young players.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to my final pick from the Scandinavian list, and I've gone with an Icelandic international, which may lead people to believe that he's probably more well known than others, but he may be well known in the potteries in around Stoke, because one of the main reasons that I've gone with Isak Berwin Johannesson, who plays for IFK Norrköping in the Allsvenskan. There's a bit of a theme in this podcast. We've got, well, I've gone with him because his background is as interesting as he is a player, and this is taking nothing away from his ability. We'll get onto that, but he is a very, very intriguing figure in terms of the history of his family in professional football. He was born in Sutton Coldfield in the UK, which is near Birmingham, for anybody who doesn't know. Shout out to anybody who's listening from that part of the world and didn't know that. And his dad, which I was really surprised to find out, is the former Aston Villa, Wolves, Leicester, Burnley and Huddersfield midfielder, Joey Gudjonsson. And the more that you dig, you find out that Isak Bergman Johansson's grandfather is Gudjon Thordarson, who is the former Icelandic footballer and the former manager of Stoke, Barnsley, Notts County, Crewe, a whole host of other Icelandic clubs. His uncle is Bjarni Gudjonsson, who's another former Icelandic international, played over 100 times for Stoke, played for Coventry, Plymouth, and interestingly is currently the under-19s coach at Norrköping. We're not done yet. Another uncle is Thorda Gudjonsson, who was a striker, Icelandic international, you may have guessed, who played for Genk, Bochum, Derby, Preston, and Stoke. And his third paternal uncle is Bjorn Sigurðarson, who plays for Molde at the moment in Norway, but was previously at Wolves and also appeared for Iceland at the 2018 World Cup. So there's a lot to unpack there. You know, he's got
I think there's one more. There's a cousin who plays for Norrköping as well.
There's a cousin. Oh
Yeah.
no, I can't believe that I've missed this. He was right under my nose at
He,
exactly the same team.
he has a younger cousin. I'm not sure if he's made the breakthrough or if he's about to make the breakthrough in first team football, but I know that he's highly rated as well. I can't for the life of me remember his name because Icelandic names, for people who are wondering why the surnames are so different, it's not in Iceland. Naming is slightly different, where you take, I think, part of the name of the father and then join it onto it. I'm not sure how it all works, but yeah, I'm sure there is another one, but it's some family tree.
Yeah, it's the Icelandic naming customs. I think you take your father. It's patronymic, so you take your father's name and then add son or in Icelandic sen on the end. So the sons of Joey Gudjonsson, for example, is his father was Gudjon
Yes,
Thordarson, so he is Gudjonsson. Whereas with Bergman Johannesson, Joey Gudjonsson's actual name is Johan or Johannes, so that's why Isak Bergman Johannesson's surname is Johannesson. Which, for anybody who came to this podcast for Icelandic family trees, you'd be delighted. For others who've come for player analysis, believe me, we are getting onto that. But yeah, IBJ, as I think I'm going to call him from now on, is an 18-year-old Icelandic international. He plays for Norrköping, only recently turned 18, played at the Under-21 European Championships with Iceland, and it did appear a little bit out of his depth, but that was mainly because the entire Iceland team were. At club level, no, he's been tried over a number of different midfield positions, probably to gauge where he's best at in senior football. Very similar to Schelderup, I think, at Noduland. But last season he earned 9 assists in the Allsvenskan as a 17-year-old, which is obviously a figure that you can't really ignore. And we mentioned scouted Lou Davies and his infinite wisdom with Akikunmi Amu earlier on, but he has been a very, very big advocate for Bergman Johansson, who, you know, he expects him to be used in a double pivot this season as a number 8, mainly because he's a very intelligent, very, very mobile, very technique based player. And I mean, Lou was very kind enough to send me his notes on him to sort of go against my own assessments. And there were a few areas where we both came up with the same sort of things. And that was sort of in terms of his technique and his decision making. You know, his first touch is very good. His close control is very good. And for an 18-year-old playing top level football, does tend to make very alert, sharp, you know, forward thinking decisions. Whereas you might think that somebody his age would maybe dawdle on the ball a little more, or maybe be a little bit more hesitant to play the right pass at the right time. There isn't any of that, I think, or at the very least, very little of it, which is always quite encouraging. The one area that we did sort of we did agree on in terms of the negatives, and I wouldn't say they're negative, so to speak, but was that his defensive side of the game, and this was something which really showed up at Under-21 Euros. Was that his defensive awareness, his physicality in defensive duels, that's probably a little bit lacking at the moment. Whether that will hinder him in a double pivot this season with Norrköping remains to be seen. But yeah, he's not he's not a hugely physical player, but there are plenty of redeeming aspects to his game. I'm sure you've seen a little bit of him, Lee, considering that you know who his cousin is.
I have. This was the only player who I actually also had on my original list. It just so happens a little peek behind the curtain for everybody that you sent me your list first. So obviously you got in there first and managed to claim him before I could. I also didn't know that we're allowed to get other people to do our homework for us. So from now on, I'll make sure I remember that for these podcasts. And solicit a
It was
little help.
it was purely to see whether I was assessing him on the same plane as who I would describe as sort of the world leading expert on Isak Bergman Johannesson, which is Lou Davies,
Yeah,
who does fantastic work for Scouted, lots of stuff behind the scenes.
yeah.
But I wanted to see if I was on the right lines. A little bit of imposter syndrome coming in here.
Maybe. He is a real talent. I think that you talked about his family tree, and I think that from a potential point of view and from where his career could develop from and into, I think he could be the one who goes on to do bigger things in the game than his dad, his granddad, his uncles. Not sure about his cousin yet. We'll have to wait and see on that one. It's a mark of a player that I think Lou's absolutely right. I think he's going to play in a double pivot this year for no chopping. I'm expecting them to be kind of top six in the Allsvenskan, not quite up. I mean, from a purely talent point of view, their squad is absolutely packed. But I think that there are certain issues in terms of tactical considerations. They're not quite at the level where I think they'll be challenging for the league title this season. And I do think he'll play in that double pivot as a number 8. I think that this is partly going to really help his development because you're absolutely right. His defensive side of his game is weaker than his offensive side. He's worse off the ball than he is on the ball. He can let runners come off him at times. He can get himself a little bit caught out in pockets of space where he's not tracked the runners and been able to move across, slide across to block passing lanes. Physically as well, although he is a good height, I think he's just a shade under 6 feet tall. He can still be pushed off the ball a little bit. He's still got time to fill out, but really, I would expect him to start gaining weight in terms of muscle from about this point in his development. And you will see him over the next 12, 14, 16 months. He will start to put a little bit more weight on. As they change their training regime for him to get him bulked up a little bit to play in that midfield. But on the ball, I think that you ran through a lot of his technical qualities, and you're absolutely bang on. How I would summarise it is that he's a really clean player. You see him receive the ball really well. I talked about it before with another player, but first touch into space, open up the game a little bit, give yourself time on the ball, and then he's got the quality to play little interlinking passes in tight areas or to stretch the field with longer passes. So he has that versatility on the ball that you really like in a midfield player. And he also carries a little bit of a goal threat when he moves up towards the final third as well. So yeah, he's another one who I am really high on. Again, I don't expect him to stay in Sweden for long. So Norrköping fans, enjoy while he's there. And we'll look to see where he moves on to next.
Yeah, I think so. I think he'll probably end up being turfed out by his cousin, whoever that is. I think and bonus points for anybody who tweets the account and tells us his name, because that'll be quite nice to see that other people have shared
I'll give
the
you all a
affinity.
tip, 'cause since Joe had somebody do my homework for me. I actually listened the other day to the Nordic Football Pod, which is Jonathan Fadugba and Steve Weiss, I think, that do that. They had a whole Allsvenskan preview podcast that I listened to, and I'm fairly sure that Jonathan mentions the cousin in there. I think that's where I picked up on it from. So if you do want to get those bonus points and tweet Joe, then go and listen to that first and send the name of the player.
Moving on to the final player in our list, and that is Lee's third pick. He is Burman Chavich from who? Well, I say from Malmo. He's only just gone to Malmo. Do you have any more sort of on? I mean, in my list here, I've only got his surname. So Lee, could you tell us what his first name is, please?
Yeah, sure. This is Velkyo Bermanchevich, who is a 23-year-old, so he's right at the fringes of scouted football, relevancy, if you like. But he has only just moved, as you said, to Malmo and Allsvenskan, and he moved from Kukuriki. I'm pronouncing that wrong, I know I am, because I'm not getting the inflection right for Serbian, but Kukuriki in Serbia. I wanted to talk a little bit about Berwin Chavich because he's an example of a player who I have been touting Berman Chavich to clubs around Europe as part of our consultancy for Total Football Analysis. Whenever a club in Scandinavia, in Belgium or Holland come to us and say, we're interested in finding young players, wingers, can you help us? Berman Chavich has always been on my list. For one reason and another, the moves never came off for him. I think he's another player whose dribbling stats are absolutely unreal. That's why he always comes up when you do data searches on leagues in Eastern Europe or in general when you're looking for young wingers, because his dribbles per 90 are absolutely through the roof. He's a very direct left-sided attacking player. He likes to pick up the ball on his right foot, and then he moves really quickly into the half spaces and just drives at the opposition. I think that clubs have always been a little bit put off by the fact that his final ball sometimes seems a little bit loose. He's very direct in that he gets the ball and dribbles. Maybe he doesn't interplay as much as he could. Maybe he tries to do too much on his own. But I found it really interesting that Malmo finally, and just for clarity, Malmo were not one of the clubs who I've done any consultancy over, so I'm not claiming any relevancy in terms of this was down to me or I put his name forward, nothing like that. Malmo signed him completely on their own, and it caught me by surprise when they did so because it came quite late, I think. But now he's came into Malmo, to a club who many people think are going to win the Allsvenskan this season and win it quite easily. So he'll be playing in a very attacking setup, very possession dominated, under the former Newcastle striker Jon Dahl Tomasson. Newcastle as well as I think Feyenoord and Milan and a few others in there. He's somebody who I expect to have a big impact over the course of the season. But more than anything else, I wanted to kind of highlight how players sometimes can look really good in certain markets, in certain leagues, but for one reason or another don't get the chance to move. Burman Chavich, as I said, he's a quality dribbler. He's somebody who has a goal threat as well, but he also has really, really interesting defensive metrics for a left winger. He tracks back really well, as we talked about, I think, with Amu and how he needs to add that to his game. He could look at Berman Chavich as an example of that because he tracks back to help his fullback really well. He blocks passing lanes. He angles his run when pressing the ball to cut passing lanes and to make sure that the ball carrier is put under maximum pressure. And all of these things are signs of a player who at 23 was at the stage of his career where he was going to start stagnating, I think, if he stayed in Serbian football for much longer. I actually fully thought that Berman Chavich would get a move to a higher level. I was convinced that a club in Belgium or Holland would be the right move for him. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on at Malmo. And if he does do really well, whether he gets another move off the back of it or whether this is kind of his level and maybe I've been wrong all along.
So just to clarify, as I've been allowed to get somebody else to do my homework for me, Lee is allowed to have an axe to grind over players that he's consistently recommended, but his recommendations have fallen on deaf ears.
They've just been
And
ignored, Joe. I don't understand why. Nobody wants to sign him. For any people who are listening to us though, who play Football Manager and want Football Manager picks, there's one for you. Go and sign him and see how he develops for you.
Yeah, he'll probably still be at Kukaritsi in the game as well, won't he? Because he only signed for Malmo at the start of March, which I think about players signing for teams in March, and I'm starting to think about the days before transfer windows existed.
Yeah.
It all seems a bit odd and it all seems a bit alien and a bit weird. But yeah, he signed in March. I think, yeah, in terms of Berman Chavich, yeah, he's very much at the upper echelons of scouted relevancy, as Lee said. And another player who, I mean, just from on face value, does look like a very, very interesting dribbler. I think leagues such as Belgium and Holland, I'd probably agree that there is probably a market for those types of players there, but I don't necessarily think that Malmo's a bad move. I think that them obviously being, title challengers and likely to be playing European football most seasons is probably a good indicator of his top level ability, and the fact that he's been given for Scandinavian teams a long contract. He's there until 2024, and I think that's usually a good indicator, a hint towards how highly teams in that part of the world rate the players that they're bringing in. If they're giving them 1 or 2 year deals, then it's the onus is very much on the player to display why they should be given an extended terms. But with players such as Bermanchevich and Beni Triore, who we discussed earlier, giving them long contracts is very much and even Bojgrevnik. These are players where they've been given a long contract to protect their value. They're very much seen as assets who the club can't afford to lose, but are very accepting that if they did have a very good season, then they would have the leverage to say, well, he's got a contract for another 3 years, you're going to have to pay up. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps things up for us on this episode. A bit of Scandi pod scouting for us. I think we've had a nice spread. 16-year-old Andreas Schelderup, 23-year-old Velkyo Bermanchevich, and everybody else in between from the Allsvenskan, Elitserien, and the Danish Superliga. That's all from us. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you like more podcasts such as this, then do check out the Scouted Football Patreon and become a subscriber. Or if you'd like to hold this type of analysis in your hands, then do check out the Scouted Football Handbooks, which you can get from sfhandbook.com. All that's left to do is say thank you very much, Lee, for joining me again. This has been, as ever with the scouting pods, a whirlwind tour of a particular region, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, Joe. Me too.
Excellent stuff. Right, well, in the meantime, take care, stay safe, and bye for now. Get 20% off and free delivery with the code SCOUTED20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free delivery at manscaped.com. Use code SCOUTED20. Your balls will thank you.